Welcome to OSSB Inside and Out, a podcast about staff member and alumni experiences at the Ohio State School for the Blind. Each week, we interview someone from the Ohio State School for the Blind about their experiences. Now here's your host, Brendon Hamblin.
Welcome back to another episode of the podcast. Today on the podcast, I have OSSB graduate Jordy Stringer from, let's start out when you started at OSSB and when you graduated.
So I first just want to take an opportunity to thank you, Brendon, for doing this podcast. I think it's really important that we be able to not only highlight the individuals who've graduated and their accomplishments and give them an opportunity to share some of their experiences in this format, but I think it's really important to continue to highlight the things that are ongoing at the school. There are many, many great things happening at OSSB, and a lot is happening and a lot will be happening in the future. And so they've got a really tremendous executive leadership team. And so I've had the pleasure of being at the school over the last couple of months, a number of times. Well, not the last couple of months because of COVID, but throughout the last year, working to build relationships and be a part of the transition as the school kind of goes into its next phase. So I just want to make sure that I thank you and your efforts for continuing to allow us as alumni and folks who really care about the School for the Blind to be able to share with you in this format. So just want to again say thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure to put this on. It started as just a whim, just a spur of the moment thought, but that's
how all great ideas start sometimes, just with a spark of an idea, and you go from there, and
right.
It just becomes something sometimes even unlike what we imagined. So
I'd agree.
I appreciate it.
It's a great.
Well, to answer your question, so I started, and I didn't go to OSSB for 12 years like many folks. I started a lot later in life. I started in 1998. I believe it was sometime in October of that year. I believe it was very near the end of the track season. And as some of you who've gone to the school and who've maybe listened to the podcast before know that there are kind of seasons that go on. And at that particular time in the late summer, early fall is the track season. And so I believe I started maybe about 2 weeks before track conference. And so I unfortunately didn't get to participate as an athlete that year, but I was able to go and be part of the festivities, if you will, the tournament, and be there as a manager and a water boy in that capacity. And so that was a really fun experience. As a freshman in high school when I started, again, many folks start very early in life. And I grew up in Columbus, Ohio. And so back in 1983, when I was born, there was a very newly formed mainstream program that was happening, and students who were blind and visually impaired had the opportunity to go to public school. And so my family at that time elected to send me to public school. And so I was in public school from 1986 until 1998, where I started at the School for the Blind again in October and only went there part of the day. In 1998, there was a program that had been newly developed, or maybe it wasn't newly developed, but it had been resurrected. Let's call it resurrected. I think it happened in years past, but let's call it resurrected. And students could go to both the public school and the School for the Blind for a variant of experiences, some of which were social in nature, some of which were educational in nature. And so that's what kind of began my journey at the school, was to be able to get some of the vocational training and extracurricular activities that we weren't able to get as blind students in the public school, because they really had no concept of adapting sports in the public school setting at that time. So that was the one of the real catalysts for me being very adamant about wanting to attend the School for the Blind. And I'd also had a lot of friends who had went from the public school setting to the School for the Blind residential setting, and was really excited about that and the freedom that it sounded like it gave people But that's another part of the story. So,
And I know the half day at OSSB and, well, when I was there, it was half day at OSSB and Whetstone. So that was there up until, well, COVID started, I believe. So, unless they got rid of it after I'd graduated. So,
I'm not as familiar. I do believe there are a number of students who do go outside of the campus being OSSB's campus, to engage in other educational settings. I think there are some students who go to career centers. I believe there are some students who maybe even are attending some college classes at Columbus State. So yeah, but absolutely, it was Whetstone. It was Whetstone when I did it, and I believe it stayed Whetstone all throughout the time that program exists or existed. So yeah.
Right. And you graduated what year?
I graduated in 2002. I graduated in June. I think it was June 7th, 2002. Our class at that time consisted of, and I'm probably going to forget somebody, so please forgive me if any of my former classmates are listening, but at that time, the class was myself, Dana Lehman, Ben Shue, Lacey Hughes, who's now Lacey Hughes Miller, Shawana Griffin, Deshaun Hanna, Larry Lewis, and I feel like I'm forgetting somebody. I think there was one or maybe two other people, but memory definitely fails me right now. So it was a fun class. We were a rambunctious class.
A lot of the classes were.
Yeah, absolutely. We had a lot to learn in that setting. It was a really interesting setting, very different than what a lot of students get to experience, especially in public schools. Because I was telling a story the other day about my experience, and we lived together. We ate breakfast together. We had lunch together. We had dinner together. We did homework together. We everything. We for weeks at a time. That was your family. And so, though it was a very rambunctious time, and we had a lot of learning to do, a lot of us ended up becoming very, very close and maintaining, what I believe to be lifelong friendships. In fact, I'm actually going to be getting married this fall, and Larry Lewis is going to be my best man at my wedding. So we graduated nearly 18 years ago. And so that right there is a testament to the closeness that the relationships, people are able to build at the School for the Blind. To have somebody be able to be a part of my wedding celebration 18 years after I've graduated high school, a guy who I met over 20 years ago,
Right.
to be able to do that it just speaks volumes to the atmosphere and what the experiences at the school allow you to learn and live through. So it's been a lot of fun.
Right. I'd go back and relive it if I could, but unfortunately life doesn't work that way. So
never good to live in reverse. That's what's, I think, really important about your podcast here, is allowing people to relive some of those memories and that kind of thing, because it's always very important to learn from the past, but always be moving forward. So
right.
Yeah.
Is there any memories or field trips or overall experiences from OSSB that stick out after all these years of being gone?
So I will say that there are a couple. One I'll be a little bit more serious about first, and then I'll tell you a little more of a fun kind of memory or story. So I was a student who wasn't necessarily a very serious student. I didn't have the mindset of going to college, and I didn't take education and studying particularly seriously. Somehow, though, I was, through, I guess, sheer personality, able to, I guess, hobnob my way, or for lack of a better way of saying it, into the role of the class president. And in that role, I was able to. Sorry about that, listeners. Got my voice over there in the background.
That happens.
I was able to learn a lot about leadership and what that meant. And about my sophomore, maybe midway through or almost near the end of my sophomore year, I kind of recognized that if I ever really truly wanted to really be successful and go to college and start to put myself in a position where I could make a decent living, I had to really buckle down. And so one of the things that it taught me was how to take leadership really seriously. So I fast forward to that and say that now I serve as the executive director at a Center for Independent Living in Southeast Ohio, where we serve individuals with multiple disabilities from ages 0 to I think one of our oldest folks, even who recently passed away, was in their 80s. So we actually don't have an age range, an age requirement for our services or any of those kinds of things. And so we do that and serve all individuals in the southeast part of the state of Ohio with all kinds of different varying independent living services. And I only bring that up simply to say that without the experience, I think first at OSSB with the opportunity to be the class president and figure out what being a leader was, I'm not really sure that I would have had the drive to do all the other things that got me the experiences to get here. So without that, I just really don't think that I would be the executive director of an agency that, is a federal contractor and takes states and, contracts and helps provide services for individuals who are members of the Opportunities for Ohioans with Disabilities vocational rehabilitation program and those kinds of things. So without those experiences, without the ability to have that experience, that leadership experience at OSSB, I'm not really sure that I would have turned out to be the Jordy that people now know. I think I would have maintained that old Jordy that people, I had a bit of a reputation, maybe as you might know, as a bit of a rambunctious, free-spirited, happy-go-lucky, footloose and fancy-free kind of fellow, and
right.
Didn't take things very seriously. But again, that opportunity changed the perspective that I had and allowed me to be able to grow into the position and have the perspective that I now have. So that's the more serious one. Let's see, which one of the fun ones should I tell you? I think most everybody who's an administrator who when I was a student there is now gone. So I feel pretty safe to share at least some of this stuff, although I should be careful because of my professional relationship that I don't say anything that would be too revealing.
Right.
The one thing that I'll say is that being at the School for the Blind allowed us the opportunity to have a lot of experiences as teenagers in a normal setting that being in public school and being potentially isolated from our peers would not have allowed us to have. And so regardless of what happened through those years, all of those experiences and all of the different things that went on helped to shape many, many people's lives. So I hope that the staff who are listening and who get to listen to these podcasts recognize the role that they played in shaping people. Because as I shared, we spent so much time there, even over the weekends. I mean, there would be months when we would not go home. Some students, so I was a day student and I lived in close proximity enough to be able to take the bus to school every day and back and forth. But
right.
I was also able to get some of those weekend experiences, and there'd be weekends and weeks and in cases, many months at a time where people didn't get to go home. And so to have those experiences and be a part of that was something very, very interesting. So let's see, for a story, field trips. So one of the more famous, so we had a really terrible bus. We had a really terrible old bus that seemed as if it was probably built in like the 40s or the 50s is what we all joked. Just falling apart at the seams. I think there was at one point we had even had to duct tape the front door closed when we were on the freeway once. It was a terrible bus.
I think I remember that bus.
I'll bet you do. I'll bet you do. It was a bus that we used for many, many years.
Granted, by the time I had got there, it was out of service, but it had sat on the property for
I fully
years.
expect by the time we had graduated that it was, because it was on its last wheels. Even then, as I shared, we were having to duct tape the thing together at certain points. So, but one of the running jokes was when we would be, because you'd get all your linens and you'd have to go pack the bus and load the bus, do all that good stuff.
Yeah.
And one of the running jokes was everybody would say, "Hey, so-and-so, what if the bus breaks down?" And the interesting thing or funny thing or, what came to be the joke,
Right.
every time someone would say that, sure enough, the bus would break down. No matter where we were going, no matter what we were doing, no matter if it was wrestling season, whether it was swim season, whether it was the track season, if anybody ever said that, and we would, when people would start to say it, we'd, admonish them and say, "Hey, don't say that," because we didn't want the bus to break down, because we knew that if you say that, there's a real possibility that this bus will break down. So if you could please not say that, that'd be great.
Right.
I remember one time in particular, we were going to St. Louis, Missouri. And St. Louis, Missouri is not a necessarily long drive from Ohio. It's about maybe 7-8 hours thereabouts. I believe we left Columbus that morning at approximately sometime around 9 or 10 in the morning. We generally on those kinds of trips would get out of the building about 9 or 10 in the morning. And we were scheduled to arrive in St. Louis, I believe, approximately 6 or 7 that evening. Well, some wise guy, I don't remember who it was at the time, but some wise guy said that whole thing, "Hey, what if the bus breaks down?" And somewhere in Illinois, the damn bus broke down. And it took hours and hours and hours to get a replacement. Needless to say, we roll into St. Louis at 5 a.m. the next morning. And tournament starts at 7 a.m. So we roll in 5 a.m. We get 2 hours of sleep. We get in, we get up, and I don't know how we did it, but we ended up taking. I think we took either second or third place that year in the tournament. But we had that was a wild weekend, and that was one of the ones that was much unforgettable. We were driving all through the night. It was unbelievable. As I said, we rolled into the School for the Blind in Missouri. And their school is over by the Arch. They've got a really interesting neighborhood that their school is in. So we rolled in there at like 5 in the morning, and we're having to pull stuff off the buses, and we're going through, and it was a fun time, but it was a very memorable time. One that I wouldn't trade for the world. Those times are when you see your teammates and you guys helping each other and helping people make beds and making it so that everybody can quickly get as much sleep as you possibly can. And so those are the experiences that I remember, and that kind of camaraderie and that teamwork that allowed us to go out the next morning on 2 hours of sleep. We did sleep on the bus, many of us, of course, but it's not like sleeping in a bed, obviously, especially if you're going to, go out and compete at 100% the next day.
Right.
We were able to come together as a team and rally with each other, and we maybe didn't do as good as we normally did in tournaments, but we held our own, and we got back the next day. And the great thing was that we never did. So to finish the story, we never did get another bus. And so they had to scramble. And I don't remember exactly how logistically it went down, because I was a student back then and didn't know all the logistics. But
right,
it took a day or two, but the school had to get us plane tickets, and they had to fly us all back. And so we ended up getting the fly back, which we didn't fly very often because it was always more economic at that time to drive.
Right.
In the 90s, gas was a lot cheaper. So it was way more economic for us to drive. But then that year we got to fly back, and we felt like big shots. And so that was a really fun weekend. And I remember a lot of folks that were there, and a lot of folks that were there at that tournament, have unfortunately even since passed away. And so, it's just kind of like a family at OSSB. It really is. And I almost kind of feel like that when I go there still. I walk in to the new building, and because now those who don't know, it's a very, very different campus than was the campus when I was last there. And perhaps even when you were last there, I'm not even sure when you graduated, but
I graduated in 2016. So I was there they finished construction on the new building my 10th grade year, so I was in the new building for 2 years. I'm not a fan of the new building, but we won't even go there.
Gotcha. Well, I mean, I'll say that it certainly has its perks, and it has its, technology that the old building doesn't have. It's got its smart boards, and it's got its, all the access that the students need. It's got the recording studio there that Mr. Kelly is working with students to develop other kinds of podcasts that talk about the school. So I encourage everybody to listen to those as well.
Right.
But it's got that. But you're right. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have those memories, man. It doesn't have the memories, and it's obviously still not a versatile enough building, if you ask me, because I mean, they still use the gym in the other building. The auditorium is still heavily used. The dining rooms are still used. It's all the stuff that we know about that building is and I remember fondly is still there. The gym. Right. I remember when the gym, they were replacing the gym floor.
I remember
in about the year 2000.
They replaced it. They replaced the gym floor shortly after I started in 2004. So
okay, then they must have did that again, because the gym floor has been replaced a couple of times. I remember the pool construction. The pool is still there, and still the same pool that I remember. The showers. I even at the alumni reunion was last year. I guess it was last year, 2019. We had a reunion at the school for the first time in a number of years, from what I understand. And so it's just a fun place to be, man. So full of memories and so full of life experiences. Just so full of history, more history than I even know. If you go through the halls there near the old superintendent's office, there are a number of plaques dedicated to past alumni, past administration. And it's just a cool place to be, man. I really like it. I like going there. It just kind of feels like home, Right. I know one of the things we talked about was the, if there's anything that I would share with parents or students. And the only thing that I can say is that in terms of going to school there, and if I would recommend them having this kind of experience, I recommend that students and parents find the environment that they believe is the best fit for their student, whether it's the blind school, whether it's a public school setting, whether it's a homeschool setting, whatever the student is going to flourish the most in is the setting that I think that you should be in. Now, and when it comes to experiences, I don't think there's anything when it comes to having team-like experiences and being able to be a part of a team, part of a band, part of a choir, right. part of whatever the other clubs are. I forget all the clubs now, the Kiwanis clubs and the Lions clubs and all those things. And so the School for the Blind has that, and there are not a lot of opportunities that don't exist anymore at the School for the Blind. There were years where I feel like there were opportunities that didn't exist, and I would have encouraged parents to not encourage students who are blind to go there, because there were some lacking of experiences. Right. But I don't see that anymore. I think the technology has leveled the playing field for a lot of students. I think that students who want to be a part of teams can go there. I think students who want to build and have leadership experiences can go there. And I think it's a really good place. I strongly encourage people who are blind and visually impaired to at least check out the School for the Blind and find out if it might be a good fit for your student. There's a lot of good people. There's a lot of good services. There are services there now that weren't there before. For instance, they now have a full-time dedicated vocational rehabilitation counselor dedicated to the school to help students as they begin to traverse the process of getting the services from BSBI here in our state. Right. So that's not something that we had at the school. We had our VR counselors, and we dealt with our VR counselors kind of in our own cities, and it was it just wasn't the same back then. Not that it was bad, because I think the systematic approach was different to providing services back then. But I think now that we recognize the importance of getting an early start on vocational aptitude for students, I think the School for the Blind is now, helping to pave and lead the way for some of those experiences for families and students to be able to have those. So really excited about it. It's one of my favorite places to go, as I've shared with you over the last 30 or so minutes. Right. One of my favorite places to be. I've got so many stories that I could tell, but I certainly don't want to,
Right.
tell too much and
Right.
all that. But
I get it. Now, one thing that they've recently repaired that I just found out about yesterday is the Carillon, the bell tower, that hasn't been working in probably 10 plus years.
Oh, really? Wow. I don't think I realized that.
Yeah, it's been a while. It got struck by lightning and hasn't been in commission since who knows when.
Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
I forgot just how peaceful and beautiful it was. So, you remember the bell tower working, don't you, from your time?
I do remember the bell tower. I always could tell what time of the day it was by when the bell tower was going off. You had it happening in the morning, and you also had it happening during the 3:00 hour. And so that's how you knew when it was time to get ready to go to wrestling practice or your respective club or group. The bell tower was what announced, the fact that it was 7:30 in the morning, because I think it always used to go off at 7:30, which was a half hour before I believe classes started at the time that I was a student there.
Right.
So I do. I remember it. I remember the tones. I remember more interestingly, the cartridges. So for those who don't know, there's these little cartridges that you put inside of a machine, and that's what actually makes the music that you hear. And it's on this really interesting looking long flat disc kind of thing, something that students now probably wouldn't even recognize. I barely recognize it myself, but
it's probably it probably was about the size of an 8-track tape.
A little more narrow than that, but yeah, about that same length, but a little more narrow. And it didn't have like how 8-track tapes have the little ribbon. It didn't have that. It was like a one whole piece that you stuck into like almost kind of like a digital. It almost reminded you of like a digital disc, except unlike anything that you would conceive right now of as like a digital disc.
Uh-huh. So I've taken the audio from a video that Miss Wagner, the principal at OSSB, had posted in the alumni group that we have on Facebook. And let's take a listen to how beautiful it sounds yet again after getting working again.
Let's do that.
Yes, it was.
And you could hear that for miles. I mean, you could hear that for miles and miles.
Exactly. I could sit out in the courtyard and listen to it all day.
I wonder, because so you know that you obviously know this, they built a pond out front there. There's a little fountain out there.
The retention pond?
I wonder if they've, no, the little thing that's around, so you know how when you go up the steps where the bell tower is and to the right, there's that little iron rod thing?
I know.
That's a little fountain there.
Yep.
That coupled with that sound right there, that's good stuff. That's what I like to hear right there.
That is good stuff. And I don't think the fountain has been running since maybe 2 years. One of the last alumni reunions, they got it up and going again. So I don't think it's been working since, but
it's been a while, because it's been a while since I've seen it. And I've been in the building now over the last couple of years, a couple more times than I can count. And not always do I get back there.
Right.
But whenever I can sneak back there and just take a second and just stand in the lobby and just sit on the bench, it's great. I've done a couple of YouTube videos from Scarberry Hall, and it's just a really fun experience to sit up on stage and play the piano. Where so many years ago, I remember the public school did a collaborative kind of pen pal program with the School for the Blind. And so because of that, we got to visit the School for the Blind a couple of times a year. So we'd get to go over and meet our pen pal.
Right.
And we'd get to have pizza and different things of that nature. And we'd get to have a talent show. And one of the things I remember from really, really early in life, I couldn't have been any more than 10 years old. And at the time, Married with Children was all the hype, back then.
Right.
And Al Bundy and Ed O'Neill was super popular. And myself and this young man named Michael Waddle would do skits from the scenes from the show.
Right.
And one of the scenes, Al used a foul word. And I remember doing that on stage when I was like 8 or 9 or 10 years old. And I remember it like it was yesterday. And I remember the audience just hitting the floor because they just were this really. And this was this was by 1992. You probably weren't even born in 1992. But,
no, a couple years shy.
Those experiences, those memories, and all those things come flooding back when I take time and visit the school. And I think about all of the Braille and different things, and so how much that meant to me, and being able to have access to Braille books to do math and all the things that I could have, and even in some cases probably did take for granted, or overwhelming at that point. Just so many experiences that I just never thought I'd be thinking about 17 or 18 years after I'd left that place, as a student for the final time. So
right.
I did do I did work at the school as a assistant music kind of person. I worked with Carol Agler for a very short time there. And then I went on to go back to school and do some other things. And coincidentally, so we have, as I'd shared earlier, different seasons that we go through, and we have different sports. And so through those sports and different things, we have rivalries. And one of our biggest rivalries was the School for the Blind in the state of Indiana. Now, I don't say that to talk about the rivalry, only to say that later in life, I ended up actually working at the School for the Blind in Indiana as the adaptive technology instructor. And so it was really interesting to be there and be in those halls and, see the schools and the students come years later, to the place that was, the schools that we were rivals with, and to be there. And so I didn't work there for a long time. I worked there for about one school year. And then went on to start working in the field of independent living. And that's where I've basically been ever since then. That's been since 2010. And so that's about what I've been doing for the last decade. And so all my experiences have, through the School for the Blind have kind of culminated in, what I do now and the work that I do and the message that I share with people, which, is one of independence, which is one of believing in oneself. And the School for the Blind allowed me to be able to achieve that. And I would encourage anybody to learn about the history of the School for the Blind in Ohio. It's a great history. It's a really rich history. It's more than 150 years old, the history. Our building, our school was even in downtown Columbus at one point in its history. It's been at its current location for, I believe, the last 80 years, I believe.
The building, they built it in 53. They wanted to have 53. It done by 50, but setbacks with construction and what have you pushed it back to opening day of 53, sometime in 53. So,
gotcha.
It's been at that spot for a while.
I never was good in math. I'm sorry. Our math teacher at the time was Miss Sarah Thayer. And I forget what her name is now. I just recently was reacquainted with her, but sorry about that. I never was good at math. That's why I use Excel and formulas, and I also have an accountant and other people to worry about those numbers for me. So.
Right. Yep. Miss Moore is a good math teacher now. Well, Miss Thayer, as you knew her, so it's Miss Moore now. But yeah. Anything else you'd like to share or add that you haven't already touched on?
I don't know if there's anything that I would want to add. I would just strongly encourage, folks to, if you have a few minutes, to really talk with Brendon and be a part of the podcast, because as I said, there's so many rich memories and different stories that I am forgetting or am not sharing, and I think also help to demonstrate and illustrate the rich history and the rich experiences that people can have at the school. So anybody who has, a half hour or 45 minutes, should really strongly, take the time to relive a little bit of your history with Brendon about the School for the Blind, because we all have so many different experiences. We remember so many different people, so many people who aren't with us anymore. A couple people come to mind. Stephanie Clater. She was one of the reasons that I wanted to go to the School for the Blind. She and I have been childhood friends, and she recently passed away within the last few years. Andrew Humphrey, another guy who I was acquainted with a long time. People knew him as Grunge.
I remember Andrew.
Andrew, he actually ended up working at the school for a number of years in food service after the fact, and so it's so interesting to see the different dichotomy that people have after they become students with the school. But so he and so remembering him, and I encourage people to remember him and people like Kizzy Lanier, super reader, another one of the people who had a really great personality at the school. Other folks, Matthew Killian, he also has passed away within the last 4 or 5 years. So really young people too, and all these people were less than 40 years old. Every single one of these people who I'm talking about had a part in this rich history that we know and love, so just really encourage you guys to take a minute to talk with Brendon and remember people and remember these experiences. So many people that I'm sure that I didn't mention that I wish that I had and could and would. But I don't want to turn it into a shout out show. But those
Right.
folks know who they are. They're really important. We still chat, but really take some time. And I hope that this gets posted on Facebook so people do have an opportunity to take a listen and learn a little bit about my experiences and the part that OSSB played in the development of Jordy Stringer. So appreciate you, Brendon. And I think that's it for me for now, unless you have any other questions. I'm always happy to talk again if you want to talk something specific. One of the things I didn't mention that really was a really important, I think, lesson for me was being a part of the business program at the School for the Blind. We had the vending program that used to be ran by Jeff Shaw.
Right.
And those experiences also helped to put me in the kind of mindset. I certainly would be remiss if I didn't mention that one because it just played such an integral role. I even, because of that, went into the business enterprise program for a little while and worked as a vendor. And so just all those experiences that I got at the School for the Blind are so rich that I wish that I could sum it up in a sentence, but I really can't. So I'll just say I appreciate it and appreciate you again, Brendon, and all the work that you are doing to help, again, keep the spirit and memory of the school alive and all the things that are still happening there at the school, and encourage people, again, to take an opportunity to share with you their experience and what it was that was important to them about OSSB.
Thank you. It's the way I look at the podcast is kind of a continuation of the main podcast that the students do along with Mr. Kelly, and focus more on the alumni, the former and current staff, volunteers, who have you, anybody that's been directly involved with OSSB, whether it be through the marching band or any other form of
Well,
volunteering.
That's really cool, man. Because there are a lot of alumni doing a lot of really cool things, both personally and professionally. We've got a lot of folks who are doing music, and a lot of folks who are writing, and a lot of folks who are teaching, and a lot of folks who are in some really interesting leadership roles, both students, past students, so alumni, and other folks. We've got a really, really diverse and rich group of people who have gone to the School for the Blind. So I encourage you to reach out to those folks and continue to make your calls for folks to be out there, and wherever I can help encourage people to do that, feel free to let me know, and I'll do that, because I really appreciate what you're doing and think this is super important. I've gotten the opportunity to be a part of the regular OSSB podcast. I did the alumni podcast last year, and interestingly enough, I did it in June, so almost like a year to the date.
Right.
I'm doing another podcast, so don't know if this is going to be an annual thing for me, but I have appreciated the opportunity to do it and work with Dan, and he's doing an amazing job with his students and figuring out how to bring to life all those great things that are currently happening. So, yeah.
Especially now, since we've got this whole COVID-19 pandemic thing going on and the schools being shut down, they're doing an amazing job with that podcast during all of this uncertain time that we're in.
Yeah,
so,
I have listened to a couple since, I know I listened to one. I think I listened to the cooking one with Dan. I know I listened to the February podcast, so that was really good. So yeah, they're doing an amazing job, and I'll look forward to the day that students can be back in the classroom and be back in the halls, be back doing the things that allow them to be able to have those experiences at the school, and so that they can continue to be enriched by all the great things and great people that are part of the ecosystem that is the School for the Blind. So
I'd agree. I can't wait to get back and run soundboard for the concerts that I've been running for the past couple years. Having radio broadcast, a background in radio broadcast, I know the ins and outs of all of that. This podcast actually started with, or is hosted by my former employer. So, a shout out to them for hosting me for free and allowing me to bring a piece of my heart to a lot of listeners. So,
well, if that's the case, you should get better music for your intro. You should let people pick their own music when you intro. Do different music.
I may think about that idea.
I'm just joshing you, man. I'm just joshing you. You're doing a great job, man. So I thank you very much, and I'm sure your employer is proud of your product, and so you're doing a great job. So thank you, man. I appreciate it, and thanks for the opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to take the time, and thank you for taking the time with me today. So
thank you for being on, and stand by. I'm going to wrap it up, and then we can chat for a minute or two after.
Sounds good.
So stand by. All right. Thank you so much for coming on this week's episode, Jordy. I know it's been a while since we've had an episode, but hopefully we'll be back next week with another one. So until then, well, make sure to follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook for podcast updates, and make sure to follow us on the free iHeartRadio app or wherever you get your podcasts. And until next time, bye for now.
That's all, folks.
Thanks for joining us this week on OSSB Inside and Out. Make sure to follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter by searching for OSSB Inside and Out Podcast. Make sure you don't miss any future episodes. You can find us on all the major podcast platforms. Thank you for listening.